Hi, this is Hugh for Guitar.com, and in this video I'm going to be doing a baritone conversion. I'm going to be using a Fender baritone neck, and the donor guitar is an Ed O'Brien signature Strat. This is one of those projects that could be really straightforward or could turn into a bit of a nightmare. So let's find out which one this is going to be. Okay, let's see what we've got in here. Nicely packaged. Okay, that's pretty nice. It doesn't strike me as especially long compared to a regular one. There's a few kind of lacquer imperfections around the frets, but it's a nice looking neck, made in Mexico, and truss rod adjustments up here, which is not vintage correct, but it makes so much more sense practically. Okay, it comes with instructions, and they specify that this neck is designed for Fender and Squire parts, bodies, and cannot be guaranteed to fit non-Fender parts. They also say that it isn't guaranteed to fit Fender parts without some modification to the neck pocket, but hopefully we'll get lucky with this particular Strat body. Right, it's time to get this neck off, and that means discarding these strings, sadly, but they're fairly new, but they've done their job. Took a wire snippers. Don't cut these strings too close to the bridge. If you do, if something kind of gets stuck in the block, you've got no length of string on the top to help you push it through. Okay. This one is actually jammed. Sometimes just grab pliers and you can push through. Yeah, it's like the ball ends are getting stuck in the block. Hear a little click as they push out. Main thing is, don't panic, Mr. Mannering. Okay, let's get the neck off. Set the body off to one side. Right, this is a made in Mexico neck, so I'm hoping we'll have similar dimensions on the baritone neck. So this is the opportunity to assess the difference in scale length. I've aligned the two necks using a straight edge at the nut, and no doubt you've guessed that this is the baritone neck. The 19th fret of this baritone neck more or less coincides with the 21st fret of the regular neck. It's just a little bit beyond it, and this one looks a little bit longer because it's got 22 frets rather than 21. Measuring the two necks back to back, the baritone neck in total is about 1.5 inches, which is about 39 millimeters longer than the regular Strat neck. Right, so this is the bit where we find out whether we've got a really difficult project or an easy project. So the first thing I want to do is find out if these holes are being drilled deep or not. And yeah, they're pretty good. Hopefully they'll line up with the holes that are already there. Okay, looks like this is going to be a pretty perfect match. Okay, now here's the crucial bit. will it actually go in to the neck socket. It's going to be a tight fit. It's a really tight fit, but it's a good fit. It looks like this is going to work. Before I get this in there and get it screwed down, I'm going to pop the new tuners on. As you can see, the headstock already has location pinholes for the tuners, and the owner has supplied some Fender original parts for tuners, so hopefully this is going to make life very straightforward. Fortunately, a couple of these logos have become unglued, but I'll try and get those stuck back down. And these are actually lock-in tuners as well, so we can do a trial fit. And these are going to go on perfectly. That really couldn't be much easier. Okay, so we've got 3 long and 3 short. These are locking tuners. The idea of locking tuners is that you only need to kind of push them through, tighten them up, and you get like half a turn around the post, and it's supposed to improve tuning stability. Yeah, you can see that the one here has a longer shaft than the one on my left hand. So yeah, I'm going to use the taller posts for the wound strings and the shorter posts for the plain strings. The set came with these bushings and bushing washers that basically just screw down. You don't need to go crazy tight with these. If you do, you'll end up with a kind of circular, or a series of circular indentations into the top of the headstock. It's not like you're cranking down a cylinder head, it's just a set of tuners, and they're held in position by the locating pins really, so you don't need a massive amount of torque on these bushing bolts. I'm going to use this super useful Music Nomad multi-tool. Just going to tighten these down hand tight. One advantage of this is because it's some kind of nylon handle, it just doesn't scratch up the metalwork. It's 10mm if you're interested. Okay, tuners are installed, and I've got to glue these Fender logos back on here. Before I try and fit this neck, I'm going to tap all these screw holes, these outside 4 that I'm going to be using, and I want to make sure that I don't go too deep when I drive the screws in. So I'm just using this cut off piece of string to gauge the depth of the pre-drilled hole, and I'm just transferring that depth across to this screw, just wrapping a bit of tape around the thread. Okay, I'll probably stop it just before I get to that where the tape starts. So I'm going to mark all 4 screws in exactly the same way, and when I'm putting them in, I'm going to use my drill bit on the lowest torque setting, so it's just sufficient torque to drive the screws in, but the drill will stop automatically as soon as I hit the end of the pre-drilled hole, and that will stop the screw kind of carrying on and emerging on the fretboard side, which is really not what you want. The drill is going to be set probably to about just under 10. Well, the scale goes from 1 to 20, so I'll try and start it about halfway, maybe a bit lower. And to ease the screws going in, I'm just going to apply a little bit of this wax, as long as it's kind of fairly soft wax, doesn't matter what it is really. This is just waterproofing wax from Shoebox. Just going to use a cotton bud apply that to the thread, and hopefully that'll ease the passage going in. Okay, looking good. If you find that the screw holes that are pre-drilled in the neck don't actually match the holes in the body, or they're a little bit off, don't try and move the holes in the neck or try and force anything in. Drill the holes through the body out a little bit wider. You can kind of look through the holes using a torch on your phone maybe, to see if you can see how closely they align. Okay, I'm pretty confident this is going to go on without any great difficulties. Just wiping off some excess wax. Fortunately with this neck, the truss rod adjustment is at the headstock end, but if you're ever putting a neck on like this for the first time and the truss rod adjustment is down the heel end, then I would make sure you just got a little bit of tension on the truss rod, make sure it's not completely loose, because you don't want the neck to bend up from the pull of the strings. But I can adjust this one once I start tensioning the strings, and I can gauge how tightly the truss rod is currently adjusted. So the first thing with blocking off a trem for me is to tighten up these claw screws, just to make sure that the block is as far this way as it possibly can be. To do this I use my longest crosshead screwdriver. When they're too short, you often run the risk of damaging the paintwork around the back of the tremolo route, so this one gives me a good angle and keeps the handle well clear. Be careful with the ground wire, don't really want to snap that. Okay, that's pulled down about as tight as it can go. What I'm going to do now is use my digital calipers to gauge how much of a gap there is between the body and the block. 9.6 mil, 9.58. Okay, so I'm going to cut a block of wood now to just tap into this gap. I'm just going to make it probably just a fraction under 10 mil, and then that should be just soft enough then to tap in without doing any damage to the body or any other part of the guitar. Okay, this is just a block of mahogany that I've planed down to the correct thickness. It's quite a tight fit. Just going to push that down deep into the hole. And that trem should be completely blocked now, and especially when it's a friction fit in there, and when the strings pull on the block, it will just clamp it in position, and that's going to be a really firm fit, but it's also very, very quick to reverse. And hopefully that'll focus on there. You can see that the bridge is absolutely flat to the body. It's finally time for the main event, and I'm going to fit this neck to the body. Hopefully this will go very, very easily. I'm going to make sure that's as deep into the pocket as possible, and also as far as possible this way, so it's properly seated. Got a little bit of wax on the front there, it's nothing to worry about. Okay, looks good from the front. As you can see, the neck plate's still got all its stickers on. You hear the little click there as the screwdriver just shut itself off, because I've got it on quite a low torque setting. There you go again. Don't really want to crank these down too far at the moment. You want the screws to be in firm, but they don't really need to be like super tight, so you you know, you're actually pressing the plate into the wood of the body, and you know, it's not like putting up a set of shelves. The neck's got to be fixed, but it doesn't have to. You don't want to strip any threads within the neck if possible, because you don't have to end up patching everything. Okay, it's time to string up, and I'm going to use these strings that were supplied with the guitar. These are D'Addario nickel wound baritone light gauge, and gauges are 13 to 62. One thing I should mention here is that these strings are a really tight fit in the block, and you do need to yank them up really firmly to make sure that they are properly seated within the block. Just got to crank up these saddles so that the strings will actually ring. Then I can bring them up to tension and assess the tension of the truss rod to see whether that needs adjustment or not, and then the long grueling process of setting this thing up will begin. One thing I can see though is that the neck is sitting pretty straight in the pocket, so I'm quite relieved about that. Okay, that's good enough for now. I haven't done any work on the nut slots either, so what I'll probably do is bring them up to tension and then put a cap on the first fret as I kind of dial in a rough radius on the saddles, and then kind of hone in on the setup. Well, it was all going so well, and we've kind of run across a little bit of a snag here. The saddle heights need to be higher than they would be for normal strings with a regular scale length, just to accommodate the wider arc of the string as it vibrates. There's greater width to it and it's more likely to rattle, and so the action needs to come up. But in order to achieve a playable action, I've got to jack these vintage style saddles right up, and the grub screws that adjust the height are only held in by a very short length of threaded metal in the top of the saddle, so everything's kind of gone really wobbly. When I get in there with a Allen key, they just kind of like a pair of drunk legs really. So I think the solution to this is to put a more modern style of saddle on, this kind of blocky style, because the threaded length goes all the way through the saddle and basically provides a little bit more stability for the height adjustment screw. So I'm going to change all of these now to these more modern saddles, and hopefully that's going to solve the problem. Well, the parts have arrived from All Parts. These are the new saddles I'm going to use. Chrome bridge saddles for Stratocaster. There's the order number. So let's get these out of the packet and get them onto the guitar, and I can start setting this up. One of the main concerns with this project is whether I'm going to be able to get the low string to intonate properly. Hopefully the added scale length with the baritone neck will help, but I'm also expecting to have to jack the saddle back as far as possible. So for this low string saddle, I'm going to use a shorter spring than I'm going to be using on the other saddles, and hopefully that'll give me just a little bit of extra leeway to get it back as far as possible. Another really good thing about these saddles compared to the vintage style ones is they're slightly shorter, and also the opening for the string goes pretty much to the front rather than having a relatively short slot, so there's less to obstruct the string as it comes through the block and up over the top of the saddle. Okay, with the saddles now on, I can restring the guitar, just get these strings back through the locking tuners, and I'm going to capo this at the first fret and then do a rough adjustment of the saddles in terms of height, and once it's playing pretty well with the capo on the first fret, I'll think about making the nut slots. saddle set actually comes with an Allen key. So what I'm going to do, which interestingly doesn't appear to fit. Wow, okay, no problem. What I'm going to do is just adjust the two outer string saddles just sufficiently so I can get a clean note, both open and fretted, all the way up the board, and then I'm just going to use a radius gauge to create an arc for these saddle heights, which roughly corresponds with the fretboard, and we can use that as the basis for the setup. I do actually have some proper radius gauges, but I couldn't find them. A bit chaotic here at the moment, so what I've decided to do is just lay one of my radius blocks, sanding blocks, across the top, so it's resting on the two outer strings. And I can use that as a guide for rough setting the saddle heights. The radius of this particular board is 9.5 inches, so of course I got a 9.5 inch block. Right. The notes ring out. Okay, I'm going to get it in tune and going to start cutting some nut slots. If you're doing this as a one-off project, then you might decide that it's probably not worth the expense of buying a set of these, and you can farm this out to your local luthier who'll do it very quickly and far more cost effectively, I would imagine. But I do nut work all the time, so I'm just using my regular nut files. What I do have to do, however, is the one that's the side that's labelled string 6 I'll use for string 5, and the one that's labelled string 5 I'll use for string 4. This one I'll probably start with the string 6 file and probably have to open it out a little bit with a needle file, but shouldn't be too difficult. I think I'll just use a narrower file just to get it started. There you go. I'll take each one of these down a little bit and then kind of zone in on the setup. From there, I think these two strings are probably going to need a string tree, but we'll find out soon enough. Okay, so we have a slight problem with the intonation. This saddle here needs to come back even further, and the spring is completely compressed. The other thing is that the intonation screw has come so far forward in the saddle that it's actually starting to touch on the string here. So in order to hopefully get this thing to intonate properly, I'm going to have to shorten the screw, and I'm also going to have to, in all likelihood, remove the spring altogether. So I've shortened the intonation screw to about 12mm and cleaned up, well, just sawed the end off and then cleaned up the threads with a needle file, and it's going in quite easily. As you can see, I've removed the spring. Just want to gauge exactly where this needs to be. I think it's going to be all the way back, would be my guess. And that's exactly as it turned out. I had to adjust the low string saddle all the way back on the bridge, and even with the bridge adjusted flat to the body, it was still a little bit marginal for intonation. This is a perfectly viable conversion, but if you want to tune below, say, a low C, maybe a low B, you're going to need a slightly longer neck. I would say 27.5 inch rather than 27 inch would be kind of a bare minimum. That said, you might get away with it with slightly heavier strings, but I do find the low string with this particular set and this scale length just a little bit loose. Having said that, it's a really nicely made neck and it fits the body very snugly. It's a relatively straightforward project as long as you've got saddles that can be adjusted quite high. It didn't work out with the vintage style saddles that came with this Ed O'Brien Strat. And really the only obstacle for kind of the amateur guitar builder really is possibly the nut slots, which you could always farm out to somebody who has a bit more experience than yourself. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and see you next time. Now it's time to take a listen.